6 disturbing stories from Reddit Let's Not Meet. The last story will have you rethinking your next camping trip. I had to move to a different country for a year to try to feel safe. I'll try not to make this too long. Names have been changed for privacy reasons. I was living in a city in Canada. Born and raised there. I had to walk about a block and a half to my bus stop every morning where, on a typical day, my friends Cassie and Emily would be. On occasion, we would get the guys that would miss their bus and walk to our stop instead, since it was closest to the school and the last bus stop of the morning. One of the guys that would show up on occasion was a guy named Ron and sometimes his friend Tim. Ron took a liking to me immediately and started showing up to my stop every day. I didn't have a very long walk home from the bus stop, but I started to feel really uncomfortable. I changed it up and started walking home from school instead. The problem with this was that the most direct route led straight through the woods. Seniors used to go into them and party a lot, which you could tell by the large amount of beer bottles and beer cans all over the forest. One day, while walking through the woods, I hear twigs snapping behind me. I thought it was a deer at first and kept going. The snapping continued and got closer. I looked back, the twigs stopped snapping and no one was there. I started running instead. I made it home and locked my front door. I kept my parents in the loop for the entirety of this ordeal, by the way, so they were quite aware of what was going on. The next day, I decided to take the bus again. Ron shows up at my stop again, and I try to ignore him. He gets on the bus and sits directly behind me. I finally snapped and yelled, "Look Ron, I have a fucking boyfriend. Please leave me alone." He asks what his name is and I lie. The first name I could think of was Paul. Unfortunately, there was a Paul at my bus stop, just someone I didn't even know, nor had never really talked to before. I come home and everything seems fine. The next morning, I start walking to the bus stop and see Ron and Tim there, cornering Paul with a hunting knife. I started to run, but Ron caught up to me and held me down, putting the knife against my throat. I must have had fucking angels looking out for me, because the bus rounded the corner as soon as he did that. He let me up and started walking back to the bus stop. I ran for my house again, except this time I was successful. I immediately told my mom and she called the police. They took a statement from Paul at school and me at my house. They searched both lockers of Ron and Tim and both were expelled. Because a piece of paper is meaningless, my mom insisted I spend a year in the States with my aunt, which I did. I still feel really uncomfortable walking anywhere by myself to this day. Creepy guy hiding in bushes at night. So this happened a few months ago, and I haven't thought much of it, but thought it'd be cool to share. I work super early shifts, around 3 AM to 8 AM, at a store. Since I didn't drive a car at the time, I was left to walk about 25 minutes to work like 5 times a week. I always try to stay wary of everything around me, especially since I don't live in the best area, and almost got robbed by a few guys on bikes at night literally a couple days after this happened. I normally play music with my earphones on, so I was walking down this little cutaway that was almost pitch black. There were trees covering any space for street lights. As I'm walking I hear rustling in the bushes beside me, but I just passed it off as a bird or squirrel or something and keep walking. That is until I see a crawled up figure in the corner of my eye and just freeze up as his pitch black, 6 foot something silhouette stands up and stares at me with his illuminating eyes and a huge tree branch taller than the both of us in his right arm. I try to pass it off as normal and just speed walk away and take out my earphones to be more alert, but I try to evade him by crossing roads, making turns, etc. But he doesn't give up and follows on in the pitch black. I get to this small hill and you'd never guess what's up there. A police car. You don't understand how relieved I was to see 2 female police officers up there. They started trying to ask me questions from across the road, but I probably looked super shaken up and tried signaling that the guy 2 feet behind me with a huge tree branch isn't someone I know. They finally realized and pointed their tasers at him, and asked him questions while I crossed onto their side of the road. Not the most interesting story, but thought I'd share. On a side note, this was during a week where I almost got robbed by guys on motorbikes with knives a few days after this incident, and where a store got robbed, and I saw guys fleeing with cash registers in their hands a couple days prior to this. Another poster asks, did you ever find out why he was following you, or whether he was arrested or anything? Op says, I think they took him to the station, cause he looked pretty rough, ripped out shirt and shorts, looked super malnourished and skinny, covered in dirt, but no, they told me to just go to work cause it was only like 2 minutes away, and they'd come check if I got there safely later, which they did cause they waved to me through the glass, but probably didn't wanna interrupt cause the store isn't open to the public at night. Why are you living in my house? So back in 2010, I lived in a real dive of a place with 4 other guys. It was a triplex the owner had converted into one house. The place was just short of being condemned, but we were all in our 20s and wanted a party house, so it totally worked for us. We threw so many parties that we just didn't notice a lot of stuff. Like when the spare bedroom window was smashed. We assumed one of our drunk friends did it by accident. Anytime food went missing, obviously one of our drunk idiot roommates just stole it, even though no one ever fessed up to it. We also had a ridiculous problem with what we assumed were raccoons. All the damn time we'd hear scratching and shuffling up on the roof. Every morning we'd go out, and our trash would be all over the place. Well, after about a year of random messes, missing food/alcohol and eerie scratches, one of my roommates and I were leaving the house at the same time for work. As we stepped outside, there's a familiar woman in our front yard. We've seen her a few times wandering the streets in the neighborhood, but never really paid her any attention. She's wearing one of my t-shirts and going through our trash can, tossing things on the ground she isn't interested in. My roommate and I both freeze as we see the woman doing this, and she very slowly looks up at us. Her eyes are totally glassed over, and she stares at us with confusion all over her face. My eyes go wide as I recognize my t-shirt, and I go to open my mouth when she says something that to this day has made me shudder. Why are you living in my house? And that was all I could handle. I assure you, I'm not someone that is ever short on words, but this rendered me entirely speechless. My roommate and I stared at each other, eyes wide, got into our cars, and drove the hell away from our own home, just to get away from that situation. That night, when we had all the boys together, we told them what had happened. And we made the decision to finally investigate the roof. Turns out, we had a flat roof. It's not generally the kind of thing you think about. Most roofs are slanted or have angles. Not ours. It was just a flat roof, like a 2-story building, got cut in half. You just couldn't see the top because it had an awning that blocked the flat roof from view around it. So for the first time, we climbed up there and discovered someone had been living on our roof. Many of our missing things were strewn all over. There was a makeshift bed, spare clothing, food, wrappers, water and even books all just sitting there. We moved out shortly after that. But I have never forgotten the look of that lady staring through me and asking what I was doing living in her house. Madam Roof Dweller, let's not meet again. I've never really told this story, at least not completely, but it's something that I still think about from time to time. It kind of haunts me. I used to work as a manager of a fast food place in a rather seedy part of a medium-sized city. I'd worked at the nicer location until they decided to transfer me, and there were rumors that the location I ended up getting center was going to be shut down, which did end up happening a few years after I finally left. Anyway, the point is that the place wasn't being well taken care of. The dining room was dated and old, and the owners were certainly not updating or maintaining the place well. They were just barely maintaining the very basic safety requirements, and sometimes they weren't at all. For example, I often worked the closing shift, which for this location at the time was 4 PM to midnight. Between 7 PM and 11 PM, it was me running the drive-thru and front counter by myself, and one employee running the kitchen. At 11 PM that other employee would go home, and I was left by myself to tidy up and do the deposit between 11 PM and 12 PM. This isn't really safe, and I'm not sure it was even entirely legal at the time. This was over a decade ago, so who knows. Just to provide a little context and background here, I'm a girl, but I'm not what you would consider small. I'm 6 feet 0, and during this time, I think people would probably say I came across as more than a little stern. I was younger, but I'd already spent years working in fast food, getting treated like crap by customers, and having drinks and food thrown at me. The location I worked at was a swarm with junkies and drug dealers and just general scary behavior. All this to say, I didn't get ruffled that easily, and I took a lot of things in stride. However, on this night, I was working the night shift with a new guy. The new guy had probably been working there for no more than a few weeks. I'd worked with him a few times before, but never the closing shift, and, from the first time I'd meet him, I'd always gotten a strange vibe from him. And again, I'm not someone who, at the time, got ruffled easily. Prior to this, I'd worked with a night janitor at the other location who'd had an Adderall addiction and rather unpredictable and scary rage problem and some creepy incel kid who barely spoke more than 2 words at a time. And when he did it was always something about how much he disliked women, and me in particular, not an exaggeration. But this guy, this new dude, he was a whole different level of weird. He had a kid, and professed to be a single father. He'd brought the kid around during the day and the kid and his clothing were always really dirty. Like really dirty, and, not only that, but the kid also occasionally had bruises on his head and arms. The kid was a toddler, and I know that toddlers can get into things, but one look at that kid and I knew that those bruises were not from just a little kid messing around. I never saw the new guy behave aggressively towards his kid at all, but I don't know, it was just a feeling. And that backquote feeling translated into other things. I don't know, he was just creepy. It wasn't one thing in particular, it was just a feeling I got when I was around him. He was a medium height, stocky young guy. He was totally average in every way, but he just had a vibe about him. He was always friendly, never rude or aggressive, but his eyes were just lifeless, for lack of a better descriptor. Anyway, on this night, I think he might have been called in to cover a shift for someone else. I was in charge of making the schedules most of the time, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have scheduled him to work a closing with me, since I found him so off-putting. The first part of the night was fairly normal. I ran the drive-thru and the front counter, and he ran the kitchen between 8 to 11 PM. He was talking to me, on and on off, between orders. Telling me about his ex, and how he'd come to be a single father. Apparently, the mother of his child had a drug problem. In hindsight, I think a lot of what he said was meant to inspire sympathy. He really laid the troubled tale of him and his son on thick, but, at the time, I just felt a little bad for both of them. Especially his kid, who I suspected was being abused. But despite being seen as stern, and I was definitely still young and naive when it came to manipulative people. He told me that he'd moved to the city and immediately had trouble finding work prior to getting the job at the place we worked at. He said he'd been running out of money and was behind on rent, bills, and didn't have any formula for his son. At the time, I think I just empathized with him and said that sucked. We were both working in fast food, and I thought it was obvious that neither of us had any money. The place was bare bones minimum wage, and I was barely getting by with 3 roommates and only pretty much eating the free meal I was given from the restaurant every day. Anyway, he laid it on thick all night, but I don't know that I was really paying all that much attention to it. People tended to ramble when working the late shift, and I'd gotten used to listening to people spontaneously talk about their personal problems. I had a habit of just listening and not really reciprocating the sharing, and I guess this didn't really go over very well with the new guy. At some point, the new guy said something to the effect of, "You don't talk much, do you?" I'm telling you my whole life story here, and you've got nothing to say? I don't know if it was just that I was coming across as unsympathetic, or, more likely, that he was frustrated that he wasn't successfully manipulating me into giving up personal details about myself. As far as I was concerned, he was just someone I was working with, and I didn't know him. I didn't really want him to know me, and certainly I wasn't about to start telling him anything that wasn't surface level chit chat. But the guy was really intimidating. Something about his tone was off. It definitely wasn't a jokey accusation or off the cuff comment. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I remember that I just tried to play it off somehow. He didn't say anything more about it, but after that the silence between us seemed a little tense. At 11 PM, it was time for him to go home. The normal procedure was that the kitchen closer would tidy their area, and an actual kitchen cleaner would come in a few hours later to deep clean things. In our case, it was a husband and wife team who did several locations, but they didn't usually come in until a few hours after I left. So this guy was only tasked with a basic tidy, and then I would let him out, after which I would stay behind to prepare the deposit. But instead of this happening smoothly, this guy goes into the staff bathroom and stays there for a long while, like almost 20 minutes or something. I did not know what was going on, nor did I know exactly how to handle the situation. It had honestly never happened before. People usually could not get out of there fast enough at the end of the night. Was he sick? Did he fall asleep? I didn't know, but I honestly just wanted to get my work done and go home. He finally emerged and quickly walked to the door and left. I was relieved. It was weird, but I just shrugged it off and hurried back to the office to get done what I needed to get done. Not 10 minutes later, I start to hear a banging at the back door of the restaurant, loud, repeated banging. Normally, I would ignore this. The back door faced an alley and was right next to a street full of bars and pubs. People leaving the bars and pubs often got the idea that banging on the door would get them after hours food service because, well, they were drunk. So this wasn't necessarily uncommon. So I just ignored it and kept hurrying to get things done. But the banging did not stop, and it somehow just seemed to get louder and louder and more urgent. So I finally got up and went to look out the peephole to see who was there. At this point, I was definitely on edge, and this edginess swelled into full-out anxiety attack when I see that it's the new guy standing at the back door. Now, my first thought was to not open the door. I really didn't want to open the door, but I knew that he knew that I was in there. What if he forgot something inside? What if it was his house keys? Car keys or something? I was going to have to leave the building by that same door at some point, so there really seemed to be no escaping him. So, reluctantly, and very stupidly, yes, trust me, I know, I opened the door. What I opened the door to was, quite frankly, terrifying to me. He said he left his jacket, or his keys maybe, I can't remember, inside, and I told him to tell me where, and I'd go get them. I didn't want him to come inside. If this had been any other person I worked with regularly, this would be no big deal. I'd let them back in, let them get whatever they left behind, and they'd take off, but I instinctively knew I didn't want this dude back inside, in the dark, empty restaurant with me. But new dude was not having it. He pushed past me and said he'd get it himself. Then he proceeded to shut himself in the bathroom again, and at this point, I just panicked. Instead of just staying there by the door, which in hindsight, I should have, I rushed back to the office. Stupid girl, that's me, had left some of the cash I was counting for the deposit out. Question: what dummy would answer the back door at night at all, and especially with the till out? Well, this girl, I guess this dumb girl. I managed to stuff the cash in the safe and lock it, before he came to find me. The office was dark, it was summer, and the air conditioning was on full blast, but this dude was sweating a lot. I was taller than him, and I'm not a small girl, but somehow I just knew that this guy was about to hurt me. He was keyed up. As I watched his eyes dart around the office, I grabbed my jacket hanging on the hook next to me. I hadn't finished my deposit, but I was getting out of there. I didn't care how much shit I got into in the morning for my work not being done. I smiled and told him that I was just leaving and that he could walk me out. I was really just trying to not show my panic. Whatever he had planned, I wanted to give him an out for him to rethink it. So I smiled, grabbed my purse, and started to move towards the door. New guy, who was standing in the doorway, did not budge though. He started talking though, about his son, about the money trouble he'd been having, and capped the whole story off with a request for a loan. From the tone of his voice, it was clear this was not a loan. He was demanding money from me. He said he would pay me back as soon as he got paid, and that I'd really be helping him out. I didn't know what to do. He had me trapped. I wasn't leaving the office or the building unless he allowed it. Or, at this point at least, I wasn't leaving without a fight. Something told me that despite my height difference I wasn't going to win. So I gave him money from my wallet, $50, I think. When I gave it to him, he said, "Thanks, you're really helping me and my son out." I won't forget it. But when he said it, he had no expression. No smile, no speech effect at all. He didn't seem grateful or even relieved. Just dead eyes, arms limp at his sides. It was terrifying. To this day, I don't remember how I got him to the door. All I remember was shutting the door behind him, making sure the door was securely locked, and rushing into the office to burst into tears. I didn't finish my work, but I stayed in there until I could force myself to leave out of the same door. I was sure he was going to jump me when I left. The thought never occurred to me to call the cops. I don't know why. I guess I just felt like nothing serious had happened yet. He'd asked me for money, and I'd willingly given it to him, despite the fact that I felt I had no choice and had been scared shitless. I only saw him one more time after that, but neither of us ever mentioned that night or the money. I don't know why I didn't ask for it back. I think I was embarrassed or scared or both. I don't know. I don't think I've ever told anyone in my life this story, or at least, if I have, I definitely left out the part where I gave him money and never got it back. Pretty quickly after that he stopped showing up to his shifts, and I never saw him again. I don't believe in throwing words like psychopath around. I think people overuse psychological terms like that, making them just synonymous with anyone who is just horribly behaved, and there are a lot varying degrees of terribly behaved people in this world, unfortunately. But, after taking a lot of abnormal psych classes, I can say that there was definitely something about this guy's effect that was just wrong, for lack of a better term. I'd smile, he'd smile. I'd frown, he'd frown. It was almost like talking to someone pantomiming emotions. Maybe I'm just remembering it that way because it was such a terrifying experience for me. But the truth is that I've never been comfortable talking about this event, and to this day, when I do think about it, I feel just as uncomfortable as I did the day it happened, more than a decade ago. So, to the new guy, let's never meet again. P.S. The head manager at my restaurant did make an anonymous call about the guy's kid, unrelated to my incident. Obviously, I don't know what, if anything, came of that. A semi-truck and a rundown gas station. This happened a year or so ago, so forgive a lack of specific detail. One day after work, around 4 or 5 p.m., me and a girl I worked with decided to go see a movie. It was a rough shift and she and I felt like a movie would be nice. She asked if we could stop by her house so she could change clothes from our work uniform. I said that's fine, since it was maybe 5 minutes away tops. We stayed at her house for a bit. We ate a quick snack, then we got in my car. She asked if we could stop by the gas station by her house so she could grab a Red Bull. Once again, I was fine with that because it was near her house. I drove to the gas station, and the only parking was on the side of an abandoned car wash next to the gas station. To form a better image, the gas station and car wash were right next to each other, both entrances facing the same way. It was entirely dark outside. The gas station was a fairly rundown one, and didn't have any lights at the gas pumps like most do, so it was pitch black except for the light coming from my car. A semi-truck was on the side of the gas station, and had cones indicating the area that would inhibit the driver to do what he needed to do. So I assumed the parking spots wouldn't be too close, and I parked. My friend got out and went inside. I decided to stay in the car, since she would only be a few minutes. I locked my doors after she got out, as it was a force of habit to do so. I went on my phone for a bit, and after a couple minutes I saw a light flash on in the driver's side mirror of my car. I turned to look, since it was pointed in my direction. The truck driver had a flashlight pointed at my window and just held it there for a few seconds, maybe 20 or so seconds. I was kind of freaked out, but assumed he had a reason for doing so. He then began walking towards my window, still with the flashlight on. I rolled down my window, no more than an inch, assuming maybe he was just going to tell me to move my car. He stopped when he got 2 to 3 feet away from my window, then turned around. At this point, I was pretty scared, just because there was no reason for what he did. So I just rolled my window back up and waited for my friend. I'm still watching the guy, just in case, and I see him rummage around in the front part of the semi-truck for a bit. Then he stopped and turned back to my car. There was something in his hand, I'm not sure what, and I'm glad I don't know. He began walking towards my window. He was saying something inaudible, and it was at a rather loud volume. He got to my door this time and tried to open it. He tried to pull the handle a couple times, but he couldn't open it. Then he started to pull more aggressively. My friend came out of the gas station and was walking towards my car. She looked scared. I was scared. The guy saw her coming to my car and walked quickly back to his truck, and I drove away as quick as possible. I'm not entirely sure what happened or what was going to happen. The only theory my friend had was that maybe when he saw that I was a girl, the first time he had the flashlight, he assumed I'd be a good target to kidnap or put into sex trafficking. That's just a theory though. I'm glad I won't ever have to find out what he was doing. Stalked by a female solo camper for several days while on our mountain camping honeymoon. It was the summer of 2016, and I had just married my longtime girlfriend. Over the course of our 12-year relationship, we had traveled to the mountains several times in both summer and winter for camping, but also to stay in nice mountain hotels and snowboard the slopes. Naturally, we both agreed this was how we wanted to spend the first few weeks of our marriage. We booked a 20-day stay at a mountainside campground on the other side of the country. We also decided to bring our dogs with us as they too love being outdoors, and we generally bring them camping anyway. After 2 days of road tripping we arrived, quickly set up and settled in for a good long stay on the mountain. It was beautiful. A couple of days into our trip, and we had already met a bunch of fellow campers. We are very experienced campers, so we generally attract a lot of attention from novice campers asking for tools or supplies as they see we are well set up. We are usually more than happy to help people get situated if they need matches, cream, or sugar, or help setting up their equipment. It was day 4 or 5 when she first made her presence known to us. I will refer to this person as she or her as we never learned her name. We were sitting down under the shade of the large pine tree at the edge of our site, drinking beers and playing cards, when she seemingly appeared out of nowhere. She was just suddenly right there. "Can I pet your dog?" she said. Even my dogs didn't see her approach as the very sound of her voice triggered them into a startled frenzy. As the dogs were worked up already, I politely told her no. Then she just stood there, at the edge of our site. Didn't say a word. Just stood there sort of existing, but not really doing anything. She wasn't exactly staring at us, or looking at anything in particular. I asked her if she needed anything, and she said no. After a few minutes she walked off. I work with people with brain injuries, so I've had my fair share of experiences with unusual behaviors, including people with poor social skills, so I wasn't about to write this person off as creepy just yet, but she had my attention. I casually watched her walk off and enter a campsite across the path and a few sites down from ours. There was already a small tent set up in the site, but she proceeded to pull an even smaller single-person tent from her backpack and began setting it up. The day prior we saw two young girls set up the other tent and were clearly the occupants of the site. There was no further interaction with her that day, although we did notice that the owners of the other tent on the site were not around at all that day and we didn't see them return that night. Well, the next morning I'm walking to the camp showers to clean up for the day. As I walk past her site, I see she is sitting in her little tent reading a book. The door to the tent is open. I pay no attention and keep on my way to take my shower. When I'm done my shower and walking back, I notice her tent is now closed, but it's jiggling about, so I know someone is in there. Then she made her presence known in a big way. Just as I'm approaching her site on the way to mine, she unzips her tent and I immediately see that she is completely nude. She then positions herself just inside the tent at the door and lets out this over-the-top full body stretch and held her arms way up the sky while pushing her chest forward like it was some kind of mating ritual designed just for me. While she does this, she lets out what I only describe as an exotic moan. It was pretty obvious she was putting on a show for me. I continue on my way to my site and tell my wife about the display I had just been witness to. We both laughed it off and moved on with our plans to day hike a good trail to a waterfall. The trailhead for this hike was accessible from the campgrounds, so we didn't have to drive to get there. We just walked the additional 2 kilometers to the trail. We walked at a good pace, so when we got to the trail we decided to stop for a few minutes and take some photos of the surrounding mountains before heading into the thicker bush. After sitting there for maybe 5 minutes while my wife is taking pictures, she emerges from the trail that leads towards the campground. At first I thought, okay, coincidence, she's staying here and this is a pretty common trail. But then she sees that I see her and she stops dead in her tracks and just stands there. Same demeanor as our first encounter. Just standing, not doing anything in particular, but also sending creep vibes our way. This was the first time I said to my wife, I think we have a stalker. Confused, my wife then looks to where I'm looking and is immediately a little creeped out. Once again I think, whatever, maybe she's just hiking the trail, no big deal. So we continue on the trail at a good pace and she maintains a consistent distance behind us. Our dogs at this point are a little distracted by her and our youngest dog keeps turning around to watch her. I got a little fed up with the dog constantly stopping to look back, so I decided we will stop for some water and let this woman pass. Well, what does she do but fucking stop walking when we stop and once again just stands there. Okay, so now we are genuinely concerned because this is approaching horror/suspense movie creep level and I start to wonder what this girl's intentions are. Standing motionless at that distance and refusing to pass us just ramped up the oh shit factor to about 9. So my wife and I agreed to just give her and cut the hike short by taking the shorter loop, which was only another half kilometer ahead, and head back to our camp. We managed to get some distance between us by jogging every time we would make a turn, and she was out of sight. We didn't see her again until later that night. That night my wife decided to take an evening shower at the camp showers. When she returned to our camp she told me our stalker was in the bathrooms also taking a shower. This time, however, she was with 2 other girls and appeared to be getting ready for a night at the club. There is a nearby ski town that has a few nightclubs and bars, so it was reasonable to see the girls getting ready for a night out. The 2 girls she was with were the 2 we saw previously set up at her site. My wife explains that she quickly picked up on the fact that the 2 girls and our stalker friend were not well known to each other. It was clear that the 2 girls were close friends with plans to go out partying, and our stalker was making an attempt to be friends and sort of invited herself to join them in their night out. Now we know the ski town well, and the girls kept reinforcing that they were meeting at a specific restaurant before going to the bar. It was currently 10:30 p.m. and we know the restaurant they were telling her to go to was closed at 10 p.m. They were lying to her about their plans. The stalker kept asking them to, "Are you sure this place? Are you sure?" They convinced her, and she then left to her tent to finish getting ready, while the two friends stayed in the bathroom to finish their makeup. My wife went on to explain how, after she left, the two friends were mocking and making fun of our stalker. They were young 20-somethings acting like little girls in elementary school. My wife has no time for that, creepy stalker or not. She had to say something to the girls for their behavior. My wife calls them out on their behavior. Well, putting all the caddy bitch bullying aside, the girls explained to my wife that the stalker girl had set up her tent on their site when they were staying with a friend in the ski town. When they returned, they found her living at their site without invitation. She had just taken it upon herself to take a little corner of their site without knowing them at all. The girls said they were upset with her and trying to make her feel uncomfortable so she would leave, but she wouldn't leave. Of course, my wife asked them why they didn't just report her to the park warden. The excuse they gave was they were leaving the next day and didn't want to make a huge deal out of it. So whatever happened between them and the fake late dinner plans and clubbing is unknown to us. About 3 a.m. that same night, we were all awoken to a blood-curdling scream right outside our camper. At first, I was like, holy shit, that must be a wild animal. My wife is trembling, dogs barking, and I'm startled but curious. I peel back the window cover to see her, standing motionless on the path outside our trailer. I had the window cover down maybe 8 to 10 centimeters when she appears to make direct eye contact with me. My heart rate is jacked. What the actual fuck? After gazing in my general direction for what seemed like an eternity, she calmly turns around and walks to her tent. I go make sure our trailer is locked. After a good hour and a stiff whiskey, we manage to get back to sleep. So the next day is a Friday. We have friends from a nearby major city coming up the mountains to spend the weekend with us. We haven't seen them in a while, so we are excited for a couple days together. Well, they are not at our site for 15 minutes, and as they are setting up their tent, she mysteriously appears out of nowhere yet again. Like bam, there she is, but now this time she is actually in our site. I hadn't had a chance to tell our friends about her before she arrived, so they were a little more friendly than I was. She asks me once again if she can pet my dog, who during all of this is barking at her. I think I said something like, "She isn't being very friendly towards you right now, so I would prefer if you didn't." She didn't pet my dog, but she also just stood there staring at me like she was considering how she would dismember my limbs. She then notices our friend's tent brand as he is still setting it up and comments on how it's the same model as hers, although a larger sleeping capacity. My buddy has picked up on the creep vibes and my general displeasure with her presence, so just gives her the "oh, yeah cool" and keeps setting it up. Well, she starts grabbing at the tent pegs and picks up the hammer and says she will help him set it up because she has experience with it. My buddy declines and asks for his tools back. Cue the fucking psychopath stare down, but this time she has a hammer in hand, adding to the oh shit factor. She literally just drops everything right there and runs off. I go on to explain the last few days to our friends and they agree we need to keep an eye on her. So, by this time the two girlfriends whose site she had hijacked were packed up and gone. It's now Friday night and we've been drinking all day, so we are feeling pretty good. It's maybe about 11 p.m. when she walks over to our site again. She says, "Hey, you guys seem to have a lot of extra room with the tent and the camper. Do you think I could stay with you guys tonight? We could have a lot of fun in there together." My buddy is feeling pretty good from all the day beers, so he's pretty forward when he replies, "Did you just propose a gangbang to us?" Now this whole time I'm just sitting in my camp chair with my whiskey taking this all in. She wasn't really taking notice of me at all so far. Then, she smiles, turns her head and looks directly down at me and says, "I like your friend." She then turns around and walks away into the darkness of the night towards the forest. What the fuck? We are all now terrified she is going to return. I decided right then and there, if we see her again in a creepy fashion, I'm calling the park warden. This is getting silly. Well, the night is winding down, so we all decide to walk together to the bathrooms to clean up for bed. My wife pulls on my hoodie and says, "Babe, look." I look over to see that the site she was set upon is completely destroyed. Shit everywhere. Just stuff, garbage, clothing, food. Everywhere. I thought, okay, this is weird. Could this have been a bear? No, we would have heard it. I then notice that the tent is gone. She is gone and left the site a complete mess. As luck would have it, the park patrol was completing their fire rounds and were at the messed up site when we were returning from the bathrooms. We told them there was a girl staying there who was acting erratic, and we suspected she was squatting on the site, based on our conversation with the two girls from earlier in the week. We didn't see her again for the rest of our trip until the last full day. There is a great little lookout point not far from our site, which has amazing views of the river and valley below, and it was a perfect evening to see the sunset behind the mountains. It was a lovely final send-off to an otherwise beautiful honeymoon. Just when we thought we were done with her, she emerged once again from seemingly nowhere. We were sitting on a couple chairs that are bolted in place at the viewpoint, taking pictures of the valley below. As my wife is looking through the camera viewfinder, she picks up on the woman in the distance. She is standing in the woods a little ways down mountain towards the valley, watching us. As her final act, she walked up the mountainside and sat right beside us on a boulder that was beside the chairs. She says nothing, just sits there. My wife has the brilliant idea of asking me to take one last picture of the scenery, and she gives me a little wink. I pick up on her idea right away, and I position myself so this woman is going to be in the picture. My wife wanted this lady's photo in the event something bad happens with her before we can leave the area. We took our final looks out at the beautiful scenery and headed to our camp for the night. We didn't see or hear from her again. Upon reflection, we agreed this woman had some serious mental health issues, obviously. She had zero social skills, and we did witness her attempt to make friends with those two girls that shafted her in a terrible way. That being said, she did things way beyond the realm of acceptable social awkwardness. There were moments I thought she would pull out a knife and kill us all where we stood. More than that, the stalking, the midnight screaming and running off into the woods at night was terrifying to us, and I feel a story worthy of this sub. I do have the photo on a thumb drive somewhere, and we'll see about uploading a pixelated photo if it's appropriate. To anyone else, the picture just looks like a person is sitting in the shot. But to us, it's a reminder of our wild adventure and the start of our amazing marriage. To our honeymoon stalker, let's not meet ever again. Thank you for watching. Code M. Hit the like button, comment and subscribe to see new videos daily. What? Were you expecting something clever after all that? Well, I'll let you stew in your own disappointment until next time.